back up. The first 6 weeks of our shelter in place here, we had a shutdown right away, and I think the rental market kind of recovered, and we had a fairly successful month of April. We rented some apartments. People were coming out looking at apartments. It was pretty good, and we rented places. Prices were pretty stable. And then May 1st rolled around, and just this past Monday, John emailed me and said, leasing is awful. We had 5 open houses over the weekend, and we had 0 people, or 2 people show up to all 5 open houses. I'm going to ask Ron to weigh in on this, because Ron actually is our person who answers the door and lets people into the apartments. Ron, what is that? What you saw that the last couple of 3 weeks has been slow?
Well, now you're going to make me feel like I shouldn't have logged into this chat.
Well, you don't want to. You don't have to.
No, what John reported is accurate. There were 5 units that we showed over the weekend with a grand total of 2 visits.
And that was a lot less than before?
It's been diminishing over the last few weeks, not to mention the fact that you had 2 more unusual units that rented right off the bat last weekend before.
Right.
But John can tell you how many inquiries there had been prior to the weekend, because I only saw the people that didn't show up or did. I'm not privy to the exact number of inquiries that there were that would have established what our expectations were.
Correct. Yes, and the number of inquiries that we received through our various marketing efforts were quite a bit diminished, and so we had a very reduced number of people who were responding at all. And then and John had actually said that in the office we were answering a lot more phone calls last month than we were this month. But where this got even more interesting was Monday night at 9:30, my good friend James Wavero, leasing agent extraordinaire, texted me. And James actually, he keeps track of the volume of Craigslist postings, with an understanding that the volume of Craigslist postings, reflects a level of noise. If there are a bunch of postings on Craigslist, that a bunch of people have figured out ways to double, triple, quadruple post their own places. They don't take down their ads. That some of the posts are not, legitimate, or you've got furnished units mixed in with unfurnished units. But if you track the number in general, you get a pretty good sense of what's going on. And he said that posting activity volume was up 20% just in the last 3 weeks. He said 3 weeks ago, we had 5,650 posts on Craigslist under housing in San Francisco, and we had 7,000 just last weekend. And so the number of people who are posting units is way up, and there's a tremendous amount of supply. And we're seeing on the other end of it, either the demand has stayed the same or it's gone down. And it's probably gone down, but with all that extra supply and a reduced demand, we're heading for some sort of a correction. I can also say, my first impression from that piece of information was we may also be looking at a lot of landlords who had units to rent, who decided at the very beginning they didn't want to go through the process of trying to show units while they were going through this crisis. They didn't want to have to learn, a whole new set of procedures for showing apartments, and maybe they just wanted to stop, hold their units off the market for a little while, and by the time May rolled around, they lost their patience. 6 weeks of waiting, it wasn't going to get any better, and they just decided, you know what, let's just go with it. Let's post it again. So there's 2 things. Maybe units are also staying online longer than they would otherwise because there's less demand. And so we have an accumulation of units that would be removed from the market that aren't being removed, and units that are coming onto the market that would have been on the market before, and it's accumulating from the last 6 weeks. So I don't know. I don't want to overreact to it. You never know, and it could be a fluke. It'll be interesting to see what James has to say in a week or so about this coming weekend's posting volume, whether it continues to go up. But it got me thinking about, what comes next. We don't want necessarily to have a price war of people slashing prices as fast as they can on their units and reducing their rents to very, very low levels, or much lower levels than what they're accustomed to, even though, yes, we do have to be aware that, we probably are going into a more depressed market. It's not going to be as strong as it was. And so obviously the first thing that we all have to attract interest to our units is the price. It's the most obvious indicator of people's demand for, or our demand for tenants. And it's the thing that gets people's interest the most. But there are also other things that we can do. Now, one of the things that we've been doing at RMC through the last, every downturn really, going back to the dot-com bust, is the free rent. 1 month's free rent obviously can make a difference. And it allows us to maintain a rent level. If you're going to rent a place for $4,000 a month, instead of cutting the rent by $400 or $500, you give away a month's free rent and you sign a lease. Tenant gets their month of free rent up front, and they are on their way. They've gotten the keys a month early, and they've got a term. And you get the rent at $4,000. They get their benefit up front. And we would do that for the right tenant. We would negotiate for the right tenant. And really, the other strategies that I'm looking at, and that I want to try to bring into the conversation beyond just price, relate to things like, communicating the value of working with a professional property manager versus an owner operator. Now, I know many of you guys are and have been in the past owner operators, and many of you have done it very well. But the fact of the matter for a lot of tenants out there, they don't know a company from an owner operator, and they're not really sure what the difference is. But some of the benefits that a property management company provide, we are in the office, and you can always reach us on the phone. We have our emergency answering service. We're available on a regular basis. We have electronic rent payment. We do the lease electronically. They can get it done quickly with us. We are available for electronic maintenance requests, things like that. Those are the things that we've been doing for the last 10 or 15 years to try to get people, to make our lives easier and to make our business more efficient, but it's also really, really attractive to tenants. And so I'm going to be communicating those things more effectively, through advertising, and one-on-one with tenants when we see them, when we're showing units. I'm going to try my best to explain that to people so that they understand that, they may see a unit for a lesser rent somewhere else, but they have to think about what they're getting for it. And, give me a chance. Let me see if I can match that. Obviously, we can certainly come up with a reduced rent for the right people, but let's give it a chance and try to get those right people in the building, as opposed to reducing the rent for everybody and then having too many people to choose from, possibly. Now, another idea has to do with using amenities and other benefits as ways to, to differentiate units. In a really, really hot market, for example, one thing that we would do is, offer parking or storage or something at an additional fee. And obviously throwing that into the mix helps. It's equivalent to a rent decrease, but it also makes it more attractive to people to say, well, this unit has this, and the other thing, and they're not necessarily calculating, well, the parking might have been $250. And, that's sort of more transparent pricing. I've seen that in the sale market as well. So, those sorts of things, but also, investing in the units, it's important to add things like laundry in the unit. That's maybe the number one amenity people really want. Adding the ability to have pets. A lot of you already do provide those benefits to people. Adding coin laundry to the building, even if you can't do laundry in the unit. Coin laundry in the building is a useful amenity, and nowadays we're able to lease the machines. And so the only upfront cost is the cost of adding the plumbing, the electrical work, and a duct to get the washing machine and dryer. And the machines are digital and contactless pay compatible, so people can use their phone or their watch to pay for their laundry, and you don't need an internet connection like you used to, because it's all cellular enabled and it's ready to go from the minute they plop it in there. With an electrical connection, it's ready to go. So, adding those sorts of amenities is part of what I am going to be trying as we move forward with units where we might be having an issue getting them rented, or we anticipate that market rents might be down. As I've looked at units on Craigslist, I haven't seen the prices start to correct yet. Once again, this could be a fluke, but these things aren't necessarily things that you'd want to not do if you can. In addition, other ideas that I've come up with, things like for units where laundry is not feasible at all, but it may still be a point of contention, offering a gift card for the tenant to be able to use a delivery laundry service, a couple $100, $500 for the first few months, get them accustomed to that shift in thought. Maybe that's helpful. Maybe something like a gift certificate to a delivery service, a meal delivery, to get them in the door at the beginning, to see if they are, if you can get them to sign with, if I can get them to sign with us instead of going somewhere else for perhaps a lesser rent. Maybe they like the apartment better and the rent is a little bit more. You can get that, give it an extra enticement that might get people interested. So, these are some of the ideas that I'm thinking of. As soon as I thought about this, I thought about price war, and I thought about all the things that I read, the articles that I read in business school, and I thought about avoiding these sorts of competing just on price, and finding ways to differentiate service. We haven't had too much of a need to do that over the course of the last decade here in San Francisco, but it may be the beginning of a brave new world. So we're working on that. And so I'm happy to take any thoughts or conversation if anybody wants to say something. Bert, I see you with your hand raised on the video. Go ahead.
Yeah, I also put it in chat. One other advantage of a management company is you can keep track much better than I could on local and state changes in the law, changes in the rule, declarations, interpretations, what works and what doesn't work, and that's why I used to for listing to get it, but I was managing it myself. And when that landlord got arrested, for his deck, I was saying, yeah, I just said, okay, that's it.
That's it. I'm not gonna do this anymore. Yeah, I understand.
Yeah. And the techniques that work and don't work. So.
Yeah, it's well, we're trying to stay up on that. Josh, you got one?
Yeah, I would say that another added benefit, property management. I've leased units for myself on my own, and then also with RMC. And with RMC, I can there's a trust factor. I kind of, when I'm leasing for my own units by myself, I have to say, hey, you can trust me. You can give me this confidential data. You can show me all your pay stubs, even social security numbers. I'm a good guy. They don't know. And you can see there's a little trepidation. With RMC, there's this trust factor, so I can just kind of immediately ask for these things and be very, inspire their trust much more quicker. And so it's that works well too. So just hammering home kind of trust is a big deal for tenants, because there's so many people soliciting their data from so many different sources. So anytime there's an opportunity to say, hey, we're good, I have a license, everything's gonna be fine, don't worry about it, it's a real plus.
Yeah, well, thank you for that. And also, submitting, we're not taking people's paperwork right there at the apartment. It's, hey, go online, go through this system. It's secure. You're going to be sending your stuff in through a trusted source. If anybody looks at our website and our rental listings themselves, and the button that you click when you go to apply for a unit, you see that it says Appfolio, and you want to do a quick web search, look up Appfolio. They're a big company. They do a lot of business. And so, all right, well, I think I can trust these guys if they're using this the third-party software that's, well established, as opposed to, what I'm sure a lot of owner operators end up with, which is just send me your credit score and your pay stubs and I'll figure it out. Like, okay,
yeah.
It can be difficult. So anyway, so any other thoughts or comments, go ahead, and if anybody wants to say anything or add anything, you can put it in the chat, or you can raise your hand at the bottom of the screen there under the, I think it's the participants button. But, you know, it brings me to the next topic that I wanted to bring up, which is more of a legal topic, and I'm just going to introduce it today, talk about it a little bit, my thoughts and impressions, and then Denise will be on with us on Friday to talk a little bit more in detail about this one. But, you know, all of this conversation about, you know, working with a property manager and trying to differentiate yourself and explain value has to do also with the need to run an apartment building like it's a business, and to be really business minded when it comes to the rent that you're charging. Because now we're dealing with, this isn't new, this has been the case for a long time. And it's always been the case during a crisis, a state of emergency like this. But, you know, we're not allowed to increase rents by more than 10% during a crisis. But the question is, what are we talking about? 10% over market. Who determines market rate? And what are we talking about when we're discussing market rate in a place like San Francisco, where you could have somebody who moves out of their apartment voluntarily after 20 years and their market is half of what fair market value would be? And the question is, are you violating the anti-gouging protections in the law by increasing your rent to fair market, which would be a 10%, way more than a 10% increase. In some cases, it could be double or more of the last rent. And so there are all kinds of situations where, you know, we have to be cognizant of the fact that this is there. It's interesting because we have a tenant bar in San Francisco that is paid for with public money. And so the cost to a tenant of bringing a lawsuit is nothing. The benefit of a tenant bringing a lawsuit may very well be negligible in a circumstance like this, but it could be valuable from a standpoint of getting a settlement. You know, the fact of the matter is the landlord has to then pay an attorney to defend them if such a claim is brought, and the tenant doesn't have to pay anything for that attorney. That attorney is being paid by the government in San Francisco. So, you know, we're working on how to deal with those things. You know, one example of a place where this is affecting us right now is, John actually brought this to my attention. We had a tenant who lives in a studio apartment, had a person make a maintenance request on our website, and it wasn't a name that we recognized. And we thought about it, and we then called our trusty private investigator and gave them the information. And at first, the investigator came up with some information. We worked through an attorney. The attorney works with us to hire the investigator, and the investigator found some information about the person living in New York, in Brooklyn, but that person didn't have a lot of strong ties there. Usually we're looking for something like driver's license registration, voter registration, things like that. And then, and that was months ago. And then just recently, this person registered to vote in Brooklyn. So it's pretty clear when you're registered to vote somewhere else that you're probably not residing in the apartment that you're renting in San Francisco, yet we're still receiving the rent from this person. And there's somebody with a different name living there. And so in this circumstance, we would normally file a petition to increase the rent under Costa-Hawkins, which is obviously the bill that allows us to increase the rent on vacant units. And when the last original occupant on the lease has vacated, is no longer residing in the unit, we are allowed to raise the rent to market. But our attorney said, you know, you got to wait. We have to get some clarity on how we feel about this price gouging requirement, this price gouging law in the state of emergency before we're ready to proceed. So I'm not sure exactly how long it's going to take for us to have that level of clarity and understanding. We may need to wait until the state of emergency is over, but it brings up a whole bunch of different, you know, unintended consequences, as rent control typically does. The purpose of the law, in my opinion, is in a free market where, you know, all of your rents are going to be a lot lower than they are in a place like San Francisco. You would rent to your tenant and you would be able to renew their lease every year. you'd be able to add $50 or $100 or even $200 to your rent on each renewal. If that's what the market will bear, you get to increase your rent and issue that rent increase and sign a new lease. But in San Francisco, we don't have that right. We have a set maximum to the amount of the rent increase. And obviously, as we all know, the rents lose value over time, and your rent compared with the astronomical fair market value that we have in San Francisco starts to erode. And so it puts us in a position, everybody else outside of San Francisco would be prevented from increasing their rent by more than 10%, even between tenants, to avoid having people, identifying a situation where the demand for housing has gone through the roof, and they are going to be able to get 20 or 30% more. They don't want people to be gouging in that circumstance. But what's odd about that, in my opinion, right now, is that we don't have astronomical demand. Yes, we're in a state of emergency, but nobody's out looking for apartments, and prices are about to fall, or at least we're afraid that they might be. And so it's interesting times, very interesting times to think that, we can't do the things that we would normally do if we have a tenant who's lived in an apartment for 10 years and is gaming the system based on an anti-price gouging legislation that doesn't actually have any effect on what we're doing right now. So, it's an interesting conversation. It's something that we're looking at, and we'll have more on that on Friday when we talk about this with Denise. So that's what I've got for today. Once again, I'll open the floor. Actually, I'll unmute everybody. If anybody has things they'd like to say, I welcome your feedback and conversation, and then I'll transition. And there was an article that Josh and I were talking about home sales that we can get to as well. Any thoughts? I can throw it to Josh. You want to talk about? Yes.
One quick question: what kind of timing are you looking at before you're making these decisions about the approach with regards to offering incentives? Are you going to give this another couple of weeks? Or are you going to wait until the beginning of the month? What kind of timing are you looking at for that?
I think it's going to be on a case-by-case basis. We'll certainly be talking to anybody who's got a vacancy right now about starting to implement we'll be implementing the less costly, the zero cost, marketing strategy approaches right now. And when it comes to price reductions, we'll be talking about that. And when it comes to the free months rent concept, we'll be talking about that, bringing specific circumstances to our clients, talking through it with you and getting everybody prepared for it. When it comes to offering incentives, once again, we'll make that decision in the next couple of weeks and start making that recommendation. If anybody says, hey, I'd like to try that, let's give it a shot. Just let us know if you have a vacancy that you want to apply it to.
And one of the other thing I was thinking about is this idea of you're already doing things such as painting some of these units as you do the turnover. Maybe there's some additional improvements that can be made to these things to beautify them as an incentive, perhaps custom paint colors, things like that, since we already have folks on the team that can do some of those things.
Right. Custom paint colors has not been something I've used in the past. It's certainly possible. I've not necessarily talked to too many people, or I haven't felt like that was a real motivating factor, but replacing your old appliances. If you've got appliances that are 10 years old and they still work, it's probably worth spending the money to replace them now, because you're going to end up replacing them later. At least maybe during this next tenancy, who knows? But it's better to have them new when the tenant moves in and express and show that level of attention to detail now, as opposed to trying to rent the place with ugly old appliances and then replacing them while the tenant's living there, because it broke, and putting in less expensive appliances as a result. Let's put in good appliances, black and stainless type appliances, still consumer grade, not, gourmet, super premium, but let's try to be more proactive with it now. All right, well, let me throw this to Josh, and have him talk a little bit about the sale market and reduction in overall sale volume. Go ahead.
Yeah, so April numbers are in, so it's interesting to see kind of, April is the first full month of shelter in place, so it's really interesting to see kind of what the numbers came back at. And in terms of overall sales volume, in statewide in California, sales were down 30%. In the Bay Area, sales were down 37.4%. So it's a massive drop. You haven't seen anything like that since the 2007, 2008 recession. So it was just a huge freeze. People pulling properties off market, buyers going to the sideline, everything kind of just froze up. What's interesting now in May is there is a rush of properties hitting the market. So what it is feeling like is it was just a huge pause button on the market. And I say pause button largely because, it just stopped. And right now I'm not seeing any relief on pricing. I'm seeing people out there looking for deals and throwing out offers. I'm talking to a lot of colleagues too. I had a few conversations with some realtors, and they're also getting, just like I'm getting for my listing, lowball offers. People are trying to take advantage of anxious sellers and just throw things out. A lot of preemptive offers going out there that are below list. Good agents aren't acting on these. There's no real relief on price, and listings are going up, and the buyers are kind of coming back. So that's good. The lower priced homes, the middle and the lower end, we're seeing multiple offers. And the higher end product is seeing very few offers. It's quite slow in that space, but right priced home in the right neighborhood, 10 plus offers are happening right now, which is pretty amazing. So you're seeing some frenzy. Anything over 10, I call that a frenzy, and because you're to get that, you're having 40 people look at that house, 40, 50 people at least. So it's interesting. The one thing that's throwing some folks right now is that some properties are getting a lot of attention and some are just dead, and for no rhyme or reason. So 2 months ago, that wouldn't have been the case. So people are everyone's a little confused, as are all of us in our lives, in terms of what the hell's going on here. How is this all going to play out? So that's been interesting to see what's sitting and what's moving. I was talking a lot in our prior meetings about financing and it being harder to get loans. Now I'm hearing actual stories of people saying it's harder to get a loan. JVM Lending in Walnut Creek says for their jumbo loan, $750,000 plus loan, they were doing, prior to the pandemic, 10% down with a minimum of 680 FICO. Now they've moved that to a 20% down loan and a 700 FICO. No big swing on the FICO, but 10 to 20 is a big jump. So that immediately is going to take some buyers out of the market. If they can't, they were banking on that 10%. To come up with an additional 10%, that they're out. They're going to be on the sideline. So at the same time, the buyers whose jobs have been largely unaffected, who have good savings, who are maybe planning on paying 20% anyway, or had a different loan or whatever it is, they're coming out, and there's an increase in loan applications. And a lot of these lenders, a lot of these brokers are reporting numbers that are already in May beyond what they were doing in May last year. So obviously that's the people who froze out and stayed on the sidelines, and they're coming in. So it's not necessarily new folks, but there is a rush to get back in, especially with these, like I've mentioned, these low, really great interest rates. So harder to get loan, great interest rate, more product. no rhyme or reason in terms of how to price things and what people are looking for. It's not totally clear. I have a vacant fourplex coming out in Berkeley soon. It's a fixer. It'll be interesting to see what the investment community is doing. The people who want to rehab and rent with that property. I'm sure there's still a ton of cash on the sideline that's ready to go. And some of these colleagues that I mentioned, these realtors, are seeing a lot of cash offers. So that cash is still here. So things are improving, but there's still so many unknowns. So we're still kind of in a wait and see mode. And I think
Definitely.
in this month, it'll be really interesting to see how May does in terms of getting back to normal. And then each month thereafter, also very interesting, because, you know, how this all kind of plays out is kind of anyone's guess right now.
Right, right. Bert?
Yeah, a couple questions. Josh, do you have any feeling for what's available on TICs, or what the market's like?
I haven't been watching the TIC market in specifically. Condos, from what I can tell, it's also a spike in inventory. I still, you know, same kind of thing. The middle end and the lower end is probably going to do very well. The higher end is going to struggle a bit. So yeah, I don't have anything specific to add, just because I don't have any listings in that market, so I haven't been paying close attention to it. But I see no reason that TICs will fare any better or worse as a result of what's going on. It's still a good product, and it's still, especially anything that's priced well, is still going to do fine.
The other observation is the 800-pound gorilla right now is, as we come out of this, what population will be staying at home and working remotely? You know, and that's a big influence. And so, whereas it's always been a high value for proximity, where you can walk or bike or something close in, that could turn a little bit more suburban. You know.
Yeah, there's talk of that, and I don't think that there's going to be a push to move to the suburbs, to get around. There's going to be some of that. I don't think it's going to be huge in terms of people leaving the area, getting a bigger house, getting more space, and working remotely. The lure of the city and the proximity and being here is too great. So I think some of that will happen. I don't know, you know, and I'm reading a lot of articles about that. There's definitely a lot of people saying, oh, you know, density's dead and this and that. And I'm like, density's not dead. Density is on pause. It has caution tape around it right now. But, you know, Twitter saying, you know, permanently that all their employees can work from home is interesting. Do they scatter across the world, their employees? And maybe. To what degree does someone who was working for Twitter and enjoying the city, do they go out now to Novato and buy a house and happily work remotely? Maybe. I have, you know, Novato ain't San Francisco. So
I have my doubts. I think they like the lifestyle of being, you know, in the area. For your building, the proximity to Barton downtown has been a key driver, and you know it'll be interesting to see how all the properties are affected, but particularly in your location.
Yeah, I'm 2.5 blocks on Twitter.
Right, but you're also an extremely walkable area and bikeable because it's so flat.
Yeah. 97% walk score.
And a lot of your prospective tenants also were walking and biking to get down to Caltrain to go down the peninsula, and that proximity doesn't matter to them anymore. So you know that part is it's changing everything. But that's one of the reasons why when we go back to the rental conversation, I'm not ready to start, first of all, I don't want to spook the market and start cutting prices instantly to try to get things rented this minute, because this is a unique moment in time. And on the other hand, I still have some confidence in the fundamentals of our business and the value of our units. And we'll have to wait and see. If I can go back, a couple of other things I wanted to say. One is, it's interesting. I talked to another friend in business earlier this week, and he said the larger units are definitely taking a beating right now. And if I go back and look at the number of people who are asking for forbearance based on rent, a fair population of those people are in, the roommate situations, the 2, 3, 4 bedroom units where they're splitting the rent with somebody else to get a better deal per bedroom. And that market is very difficult right now. But the studios and ones and small 2 bedrooms, probably 2 bedrooms up to somewhere between $4,000 and $5,000 max. I would say 5 is a 2 bedroom, 2 bath, like a luxury unit. That market between up to 4 or 5, I've heard is doing better. Now it hasn't necessarily been our experience yet. And we did put a unit on the market. I think we put it on the market early this week, a house in Bernal Hill. And we've already gotten 2 applications this week. And whenever I get 2 applications, before I've even shown it for a weekend, I scratch my head and go, did we mess up the pricing on that? Did I underprice that? And what's interesting about it is that I looked at, and our pricing is right on target. I think we hit the mark on that one. And the other part of it is, I think the hidden effect, and maybe another explanation that I come up with for the number of rental units on the market, has to do with Airbnb units being taken out of Airbnb and put onto the medium to long-term rental market. I see a lot more furnished listings than I used to see. When I was looking, especially in Bernal, I was seeing, I think 80% of the units I was looking at on Bernal, and there wasn't a lot. There weren't a huge number in that category. I think it was like 20 units or 10 units or something. But it felt like 70 or 80% of those units were furnished rentals. And people were asking for, a 2 to 3 month term, which probably indicates that because that vacation market is completely dead and all of our tourism is gone, that people are crowding into our marketplace. But the fact of the matter is that a vacant unit that you get with a 1-year lease is a pretty dramatically different product from a 2-month rental with somebody else's damn furniture in it. And I'm not necessarily sure. I don't know how flexible most people would be to, first of all, pay extra for furniture they don't need, and second of all, to go back and forth between those 2 product categories. I just don't see it as necessarily being all that practical for them, really.
Yeah, I mean, converting an Airbnb to a permanent rental, then you're in rent control town. Now can't get your tenant out if you want to bring it back.
Well, but they've been in rent control town. I mean, they've been required. They can only rent for 90 days maximum in a year based on our current short-term rental law. And so anybody who's asking for 30 days or more has rent control, period. And so a lot of these units are asking for a minimum 1-month term. So I don't understand how I don't understand what goes through the mind of. What's that?
They're asking for a 1-month term?
Yeah, 1 or 2 or 3 month terms. Yeah, 1, 2, 3 month terms, because they're posting on the housing category, not the short-term rental category in Craigslist. Okay. And so it says 2 to 3 month term, just for the summer. Those people would be on Airbnb. Right. If there was anything going on Airbnb, but there's nobody relocating to San Francisco right now. They're just not
traveling.
So, yeah, nobody traveling to San Francisco. Exactly. Yeah.
Well, I'm just hoping a secure bike garage is an advantage.
I think it's possible. I mean, I'm really personally, I'm really seriously thinking that, you know, biking has legs as a way of getting around for me in the future, based on the fact that, you know, I used to rely on public transit, and maybe for the rest of the year or into next year, I'm not going to be able to do that. And so, you know, biking has serious value, and, you know, I'll come to really appreciate all the bike transit improvements that you fought so hard to get in this city, Bert. Bike lanes and things are really funny, because I find myself swearing at them, you know, for all the space they take up when I drive, and I find myself really grateful for them when I'm on a bike. I guess it's sharing, isn't it? I gotta learn to share like my kids.
Right.
Oh, let me get the phone.
Phone, Bert.
Anyway, so I guess that's good for today. We got 45 minutes, and I'm happy to have any further comments, questions, ideas. Otherwise, I will see you guys on Friday with Denise to talk a little bit more about the anti-gouging law and how it relates to you.
Okay.
One more.
Thank you very much, JJ.
Absolutely. Antonio, do you have something?
Just real quick, if we're marketing properties right now, the idea of marketing a space that's a kind of an ideal little mini workspace within a place, is that something that you've been doing from the get-go here? So if folks want to have an area of their house that's kind of unique for working at home, maybe marketing that a bit more and kind of pumping that up a little bit in the language?
Sure. You know, the old 1+ bedroom, you know, great home office.
Right.
That's certainly something that that will also be mentioning more in the advertising. You know, hey, this is a great place for working from home, which everybody's doing.
Yeah, I spoke to a developer friend of mine, and they're actually in a building they're building. They're actually reworking floor plans to put in more of a den space. Kind of maybe shrinking a living room a bit and kind of putting in a nook so you can have a clear kind of desk area. So, you know, these things people are implementing these things.
Oh yeah.
That these are more long-term changes,
oh, yeah.
more permanent changes. So,
well, it'll be interesting to see how that plays out over time, because I've certainly in some of my consulting work I worked with a developer who's doing an innovative new building product, and they were talking about floor plans. And I had a meeting with an executive who was with a very large national development company building, you know, units, and they were talking about their designs had been, you know, 2 and 3 bedroom apartments with, you know, 2 to 3 bathrooms where possible, so that people, you know, could do the roommate thing and pay less per bedroom and still have nice amenities and nice apartments. And I think about, you know, all the developers that spent, you know, millions and millions of dollars building 2 and 3, you know, 3 bedroom apartments to get roommates, in a situation where now, you know, one roommate moving out is a real serious hardship, and the landlord gets brought, you know, the problem right on their doorstep. So it's the opposite side of that coin of, yeah, you get more dollars per square foot, I guess, but now you have a little bit more risk as a result of that. So yeah, how we design housing, are we going to overcorrect for a limited situation, or is this possibly something we're going to see forever as a recurring theme in our lives? I don't know.
that question runs through many aspects of this.
It does.
Don't you think,
It does.
excuse me, but don't you think that a lot of people are going to be holding back on decisions like this until we see how the election pays out?
Well, I suppose, but you still got to do the business that you're in, right?
Well, yeah, but I think people, especially buyers, because they may want to find out if they're going to have vacancy control.
Vacancy what?
Vacancy control.
Control. Yes. Yes.
If what we're trying to fight is losing.
Right. The loss of Costa-Hawkins with Prop 10 2.0. Possibly, but, you know, I'm not sure I know anybody who is willing to hold their unit off the market between now and the end of the year, on the off chance that, or on the possibility that legislation will will hold. I mean, you still want to rent the unit and get the highest rent you can now, with the recognition that you may at some point in the near future, have that limitation. But the rents you get now become your future rents forever. So, yeah.
I was thinking more buyers.
Buyers would hold off and not buy buildings.
Yes.
Right. Definitely.
Sure. Yeah. There could be some slowing down, like it always happens with big legislation on the horizon, right? You have buyers who pull back and sit it out and wait it out.
Sure. Would you like to go try and build an apartment building right now?
Yeah.
Or would you like to go buy an apartment building and then realize that you're never going to get? I mean, way back when I wrote my book, I talked about your long-term below market rent tenants are your built-in upside. Eventually, you will get that unit back. Nobody lives forever, and you manage the building well, and you'll get that unit back, and you get to raise it to market. And now, if that happens, you'll never get that, which is a serious decrease in the value of the unit.
It's time for a rewrite and a second edition.
Yeah.
Well, if Tom Bannon is right, we'll be okay.
Yeah, so. and if
you get enough money from all your participants,
yes,
your owners, get your checks in, folks.
That's right. Bert? Oh, Bert, you're muted. Hold on a second. Let me unmute you.
There you are. Is there a possibility if it did pass it, it would go to court?
I would imagine. I mean, as an illegal taking of value in all these buildings, for sure.
Right. That's a little bit different than rent control.
Yes, vacancy control is definitely different from rent control, for sure.
Much worse.
Well, the only question I have left is that maybe after the election, if we lose, maybe the Supreme Court now, this Supreme Court, United States, might look at rent control a little differently.
It'd be 5 or 10 years before you get to the Supreme Court. Meanwhile, we all have to sit with the baby with the dirty diaper for all that time until the diaper gets changed.
What choice do we have?
We don't have a choice. But anyway, all right. Well, thank you, everybody. It was good seeing you. I appreciate you joining me in the lively conversation, and we'll be getting together again on Friday afternoon. Put the link in your calendar, and I'll see you on Friday at 3 with Denise to talk a little bit more about the issues at hand and the anti-gouging law and how it pertains to us. Have a good afternoon, everybody. Take care.
Thank
you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Josh.
Bye.